In the year 105 CE, a Chinese court official named Kai Lun stood over a vat of murky water, stirring together tree bark, hemp fibers, old rags, and fishing nets. He had no idea that he was creating humanity's most dangerous weapon. Not a sword, not a spear, not even gunpowder. Something far more powerful, something that would topple empires, ignite revolutions, and give voice to the voiceless. This is the story of how paper changed everything. If you want to discover how one simple invention reshaped civilization, hit that subscribe button now. This journey will blow your mind. To understand the power of paper, we must first step into a world without it. Imagine living in ancient Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE. A scribe sits in the scorching heat, carefully pressing a reed stylus into soft clay. Each cuneiform symbol must be perfect because once the clay dries, there's no going back. He's recording a king's decree, something that must last for generations. The tablet weighs several pounds. To create a library, you'd need a warehouse. To share knowledge, you'd need a caravan. And if you dropped your work, months of effort could shatter into dust in an instant. This was humanity's first prison, the prison of heavy, fragile knowledge. In Egypt, they had something better, papyrus. Made from the pith of papyrus plants growing along the Nile, these sheets were lighter than clay, and you could actually roll them up. But papyrus had its own chains. Egypt controlled the supply completely, making it expensive and rare. Only the wealthy could afford to write. Only the powerful could afford to remember. And papyrus was fragile. It crumbled in dry climates, rotted in humid ones, and burned easily. Ideas that should have lived forever died with the materials they were written on. In China, scholars used bamboo strips, binding them together with silk cords to create books. But a single book could weigh more than a man could carry. There are stories of Chinese philosophers requiring ox carts just to transport their libraries. Knowledge literally weighed people down. Students couldn't carry their textbooks, teachers couldn't distribute lessons, and all the while in Europe, they were scraping and stretching animal skins to create parchment, a process so time-consuming and expensive that a single Bible required the skins of 300 sheep. The world was starving for a better way. Knowledge was a prisoner, locked behind walls of weight, cost, and scarcity, and humanity was desperate for a key. Enter Kai Lun, a court official in China's Han Dynasty. History doesn't record what drove him to experiment that day. Perhaps he was frustrated by the bamboo strips. Perhaps he'd seen too many important documents lost to time. Whatever the reason, he began experimenting with plant fibers, breaking them down, mixing them with water, and pressing them into thin sheets. The result was revolutionary, lightweight, smooth, and cheap to produce. Paper. But Kai Lun's invention didn't explode across the world overnight. For centuries, China guarded the secret of papermaking like a treasure. The technique slowly spread to Korea in the 4th century, but it remained an Eastern secret. Then came the Battle of Talas in 751 CE, a conflict between the Chinese Tang dynasty and the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate in what is now Kazakhstan. The Chinese lost, and among the prisoners taken were skilled papermakers. The Islamic world had just captured the secret that would change everything. Within decades, paper mills appeared in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. The Islamic Golden Age was already blooming with mathematical discoveries, astronomical observations, and medical breakthroughs. But paper accelerated everything. Suddenly, scholars could afford to write. Libraries could hold thousands of texts instead of hundreds. Knowledge could travel light and fast across the Silk Road. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a beacon of learning, and paper was its fuel. Europe, meanwhile, was still stuck with expensive parchment. When paper finally arrived through Islamic Spain and Italy in the 11th century, it faced fierce resistance. Parchment makers saw their livelihoods threatened. They spread rumors that paper was weak, that documents written on it wouldn't last, that it was somehow less legitimate than good Christian parchment made from animal skin. There were riots, there were bans. But economics has a way of winning. Paper cost a fraction of what parchment did. And slowly, inevitably, Europe began to build paper mills. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1440, Johannes Gutenberg stood in his workshop in Mainz, Germany, staring at a wine press. He'd been experimenting with movable type, creating individual metal letters that could be arranged and rearranged to print different pages. But movable type wasn't new. The Chinese and Koreans had already invented it. What made Gutenberg's moment revolutionary was the combination. Movable type plus cheap paper equaled a printing revolution. Before Gutenberg, a Bible took months to copy by hand and cost as much as a house. After Gutenberg, Bibles could be printed in weeks and cost what a worker might earn in a few months. Still expensive, but achievable. Within 50 years of Gutenberg's first press, there were more books in Europe than had been produced in the previous 1,000 years combined. Paper had been waiting for this moment, and the world would never be the same. The Catholic Church realized too late what had been unleashed. For centuries, they'd controlled knowledge by controlling who could read Scripture, who could interpret God's Word. But now ideas were escaping. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, challenging the church's sale of indulgences. It was meant as a local academic debate, but someone printed it. Someone printed thousands of copies. Within weeks, Luther's ideas had spread across Germany. Within months, across Europe. The Catholic Church tried to respond the way they always had, with authority, with condemnation, with burning. But you can't burn paper fast enough when printing presses are multiplying. Luther's pamphlets kept coming. Other reformers joined in. The Protestant Reformation exploded across Europe, shattering the religious unity that had defined the continent for 1,000 years. Kingdoms split, wars erupted, millions died, and at the heart of it all was paper. Cheap, portable, impossible to control. This pattern would repeat again and again. In the American colonies, a British immigrant named Thomas Paine published a 48-page pamphlet called Common Sense in January 1776. It argued that the colonies should break from Britain, that monarchy was absurd, that ordinary people had the right to govern themselves. Within 3 months, 100,000 copies had sold in a population of just 3 million. 6 months later, the Declaration of Independence was signed. Paper had helped birth a nation. In France, revolutionary pamphlets flooded the streets of Paris in the 1780s. Ideas about liberty, equality, and fraternity spread from coffee houses to workshops to peasant villages. When the Bastille fell in 1789, it wasn't just because people were hungry, it was because they'd read, because they'd shared ideas, because paper had carried the message that the old order could be challenged. The French Revolution consumed Europe in war for decades, redrawing borders and reshaping governments. And it all traveled on paper. But paper's revolution wasn't just political, it was educational. Before cheap paper, schools were for the wealthy. Books were treasures chained to desks in monasteries and universities. The average person would never own a book in their lifetime, never learn to read. But as paper became cheaper and printing became widespread, something remarkable happened. Schools multiplied, textbooks became affordable, literacy rates began to climb. In 1800, only about 12% of the world's population could read. By 1900, it had more than doubled. By 2000, more than 80% could read. Think about what that means. For the first time in human history, ordinary people could access the accumulated knowledge of civilization. A farmer's daughter could read Newton's laws of motion. A blacksmith's son could study medicine. Knowledge stopped being the exclusive property of priests and nobles. This was democracy of the mind, and it happened because paper made books cheap enough for everyone. Science accelerated in ways that would have been impossible without paper. Isaac Newton could read Galileo's observations. Darwin could reference hundreds of naturalists who came before him. Einstein could build on Maxwell's equations. Every breakthrough was recorded, shared, debated, and built upon. The scientific method itself depends on publication, on writing down your hypothesis, your methods, your results, so others can verify or challenge them. Without paper, science would crawl. With paper, it soared. Democracy itself took new forms. Constitutions were written down, debated, ratified. The United States Constitution, France's Declaration of the Rights of Man, countless national charters, all depended on paper. Citizens could read the laws that governed them, Lawyers could reference precedents. Courts could maintain consistent rulings. The rule of law, as we understand it, requires written law, and written law requires paper. Newspapers emerged, creating something unprecedented: an informed public. People in London could read about events in India. Farmers in rural America could follow political debates in Washington. Information that once took months to travel now moved in days. Governments could be held accountable because their actions were reported. Corruption could be exposed. Public opinion became a force that rulers had to reckon with. But paper's power was never neutral. The same presses that printed revolutionary pamphlets could print propaganda. The same paper that carried scientific truth could spread lies. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes understood paper's power perfectly. They controlled the presses, controlled the newspapers, flooded society with their version of truth. Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, Maoist China, all wielded paper as a weapon of control. But even then, underground papers circulated. Samizdat literature in the Soviet Union passed hand to hand, copied secretly. Paper found a way to carry dissent. Paper transformed economics too. The invention of paper money in China during the Tang dynasty eventually spread worldwide. Suddenly, wealth could be portable. Trade could happen on credit. Banking systems emerged. Stock markets formed. The entire architecture of modern capitalism rests on paper. Contracts, receipts, certificates, bonds. The 2008 financial crisis was triggered, in part, by mortgage-backed securities, essentially paper promising payment on houses. The global economy runs on paper promises. And then came the digital age. Computers emerged. The internet exploded. Suddenly, people were reading on screens instead of pages. Bookstores began closing. Newspapers hemorrhaged readers and revenue. The publishing industry contracted. Paperless office became a buzzword. Email replaced letters. E-books challenged physical books. After thousands of years, paper's dominance seemed to be ending. Yet here's the paradox. We're printing more paper than ever before. Worldwide, humans produce about 400 million tons of paper annually. Offices still print everything. Schools still use textbooks. Legal documents still require signatures on paper. We're consuming forests to feed our paper habit, contributing to deforestation and climate change. The invention that freed humanity's ideas is now threatening the planet that gave us those trees in the first place. But perhaps that's fitting. Every tool humans have ever created carries this duality. Fire warms and burns. Agriculture feeds and exhausts the soil. Antibiotics save and create resistant bacteria. Paper liberated knowledge and literacy, but also enabled propaganda and environmental destruction. We're always wielding tools we barely understand, creating consequences we never imagined. Stand in any library, and you're surrounded by paper's legacy. Every novel that made you weep, every textbook that opened your understanding, every letter that declared love, paper carried it all. The Constitution that guarantees your rights exists on paper. The birth certificate that proves your existence is paper. The diplomas that mark your achievements. The tickets that mark your journeys. The photos that mark your memories. All paper. Or at least they were. Kai Lun died in 121 CE, probably never knowing that his invention would reshape human civilization. He couldn't have imagined Martin Luther's printing revolution or Thomas Paine's common sense. He couldn't have foreseen libraries holding millions of books or newspapers delivered to every door. He mixed tree bark and rags in a vat, trying to solve a practical problem, and accidentally gave humanity wings. Paper didn't just record history, it made history possible. It broke the monopoly on knowledge that elites had held for millennia. It let ideas spread faster than authorities could suppress them. It turned every reader into a potential revolutionary, every writer into a potential world changer. The pen became mightier than the sword, but only because paper gave the pen somewhere to write. If this story changed how you see the world around you, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves history. Subscribe because we're uncovering more hidden stories that shaped everything. What invention do you think changed humanity most? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Think about this. Every idea that ever changed your life traveled on paper to reach you. Every belief you hold, every fact you know, every story you love. Most of them came to you through paper. or from people who learned through paper. We are, in a very real sense, paper's children. We inherited the world it created, and now we're deciding what comes next.